Thank you to Stardock Corporation who sponsored this video. If you want to pick up Sins of a Solar Empire 2, please click the link in the pinned comment or the video description. My lords, today I'm going to detail the complete timeline and the story of Sins of the Solar Empire 2, and I'll cover the three key factions: the Trader Emergency Coalition, also known as the TEC, the Vasari Empire, and the Advent Unity. The story of Sins begins with the Vasari Empire, approximately 10,000 years ago. The Vasari ruled over countless worlds and lesser species at the height of their power. Relentless and unstoppable, the Vasari Dark Fleet sought to vassalize ever more civilizations into their growing empire. Those that would not serve willingly would be enslaved, and their development halted. Almost the entire research and economic development of the Vasari was driven by their martial nature. That is, until the event occurred. Precisely what happened is lost to history, but the Vasari Empire was about to come to an abrupt and brutal end. In only a few short months, the Vasari were brought to the brink of extinction. With their worlds destroyed, the survivors began a desperate race to outrun their adversary in a mass exodus fleet. Every ship was hastily converted to hold as many of the surviving Vasari as possible, as they escaped on their long trip across the galaxy. Between approximately 7,500 and 5,000 years ago, humanity had a sizable galactic empire, but they suffered a tremendous loss. This 2,500 years of history was called the Great Schism. The Great Schism saw the end of human civilization in the galaxy, and the start of a long, dark age. During this period, anarchy reigned, with worlds ravaged, technologies lost, and history forgotten. Billions were killed in the conflict, and billions more died as each planet became isolated. With each planet left to fend for itself, humanity had to rebuild with the scars of racial memory, which would pass into legend, but then total obscurity. It would take another 3,500 years before humanity began to recover, and the road to salvation began with the formation of the Trade Order, which would later become one of the three key factions. The Trade Order is formed by a group of economically driven settlers. Each planet in the Trade Order would operate as its own sovereign entity, but with free trade across the member worlds. Over the next several centuries, the Trade Order would grow to encompass hundreds of members. However, despite the amount of autonomy allowed in forms of government and culture, a strict set of laws were enforced across members against unnatural augmentation, as well as other taboos. This is important as it will come into play later. 1,000 years ago, roughly 500 years after the founding of the Trade Order, an expansionary mission discovered a single desert world orbiting a red giant. Located on the periphery of what would become Trader Space, the people of this desert planet were found to practice the utmost in scientific and social deviancy. Shocked and disgusted, the Trade Order would conspire to exile the people of this forgotten planet far outside of Trader territory. This action would have serious repercussions in the distant future, as these people would later become the Advent Unity, a highly advanced pseudo-religious civilization that would rely heavily on spiritualism, psychic prowess, and cybernetic technologies. The Advent Unity would become the second key empire in the galaxy. Despite what would become a future problem of discovering the Advent Unity, the next 1,000 years would be deemed an age of prosperity for the Trade Order. They would experience widespread growth and peace. Major conflicts would be avoided via economic means, and only local piracy would pose a real problem to security. That was until 35 years ago, which heralded the arrival of the fleeing Vasari fleet. The Vasari had lost none of their martial abilities on their long journey through space, whereas the Trade Order had lived off stories of their ancestors' wars, which had long since passed into the depths of history. The methods and machines by which they had fought were long since buried, and consequently, when the Vasari fleet arrived, the outlying trader worlds paid dearly. Within only 3 years, the Vasari had easily wiped aside the Trade Order defences that were meant only to deal with pirates. Fearing annihilation, the Trade Order member worlds agreed to set aside some form of their autonomy to form the Trade Emergency Coalition, or the TEC. This new unified organisation would coordinate defences in order to drive back the Vasari. Sadly for humanity, it would get worse before it got better. The sins of the trade orders past would return to haunt them with the return of the Exiled, now calling themselves the Advent Unity. Arriving with a vast fleet of advanced warships and mysterious weapons, the Advent quickly brought a number of worlds under their control. Now caught in a two-front war, the already struggling TEC appeared to find itself in a hopeless situation. Approximately 20 years ago, 15 years into the war, it had become a standstill. Thanks to the industrial and manufacturing power of the TEC worlds, they managed to fend off both the Advent and the Vasari invaders. With both fronts temporarily stabilised, each race began to regroup and entrench in their respective territory. Great defensive battle stations were deployed, and critical choke points were fortified in preparation for the next great offensive actions. Another 10 years passed, and with more than a quarter of a century of constant warfare behind them, the three factions finally began to look for alternative solutions to the conflict. Many in the TEC feared that their people were losing their identity to the war, with the younger generations never knowing peace, whereas others in the TEC began to feel as though their leaders had failed to provide them with the safety that they had been promised. Some within the Advent Unity started to question their course of vengeance and whether or not this was the right thing to do, while some in the Vasari wanted to escape as soon as possible, others wanted to stay and fight. Such conditions led to the opening of talks between the three major factions for the first time, in the hope that their envoys would finally be able to bring peace. 5 years of nervous diplomacy later, and the hope that was once placed upon it was shattered. An unprecedented rebellion against the status quo government occurred in not only the TEC, but the Advent Unity and the Vasari as well. Each of the three empires split into two factions, with both loyalists and rebels on each side. The TEC loyalist members adopted a policy of isolation, intent to hyper-focus on enhanced defences, and ride out the rest of the war behind their walls. Those of the rebel faction adopted a purely militant view. They were unable to reconcile the brutality of the last 30 years, and the TEC rebels decided that peace would only come after crushing all who opposed them, but particularly the Vasari. For the first time in their history, the Advent Unity found themselves split in their course of action. The Loyalist faction wants to continue their policy of revenge against the traders and assimilate all others into Unity's influence. However, those of the Rebel faction began to suspect that some form of corruption was diverting the Unity from its proper destiny. Within the Vasari Empire, the split was less divisive, but no less severe to their people. With the Vasari now frantic to move on to new space, the Loyalist faction embraced their imperialistic nature and decided to take the resources they need by any means necessary. This leads to the deployment of a weapon of destruction that we have not yet seen on the battlefield. The Rebel faction takes an opposing view and felt that their best chance for survival was to work with the other races and either fight or flee the approaching enemy together. And now, the present day, 35 years into the war. It is a time of many unknowns, as each one of the factions seems to be stuck in a cycle of reprisal. Despite the constant infighting, the Vasari have become desperate to move on from this region of the galaxy, and suffer from an almost paralysing dread. Whatever the future holds, time has nearly run out. Perhaps whatever originally wiped them out is following them. That should have provided you with a timeline of recent events. I shall now provide further detail on each of the three factions, and I shall begin with the TEC. Compared to their more advanced enemies, the TEC have primitive and makeshift technologies. This is made up for, however, by their means of mass production and overall heavy firepower. The Coalition specialises in the use of mixed alloys and polymers to strengthen their armour. Given that they are built on trading, they have a remarkably strong economy and can utilise mass production and effective manufacturing facilities. What they lack in technology, they make up for in industrial output. The TEC are masters of industry and are quickly able to establish trade routes in multiple systems, as well as having very cost-effective methods of building their orbital structures. They can inhabit most worlds effectively, aside from volcanic ones. Where the other races rely on their offensive capabilities, are masters at fortifying their territory. The strong alloys and polymers will ensure a thick defensive hull is within all TEC orbitable structures and ships, making them very resistant to enemy firepower. With these powerful defences, they have mastered the art of having very powerful static defences as well. Their hangar bays can be retrofitted to have anti-strike craft autocannons. Their already potent Gauss turrets can be upgraded to sport missile packs and long-ranged meson bolts. And their auto-repair technology is unmatched, even by Vasari nanotech. Furthermore, the TEC make use of very low-grade laser and beam technologies, but their true strength comes from their chemical nuclear weaponry, which is equipped on many of their standard frigates and bombers. They will also make use of autocannon payloads to rip through the hulls of enemy ships. To summarise, the TEC are an awakening giant, an economic juggernaut mobilising for war. They possess massive resource gathering, trade and construction capability. Next, we move on to the Advent, whose society is known collectively as the Unity. It is a highly advanced, pseudo-religious civilization that relies heavily on spiritualism, psychic prowess, and cybernetic technologies. A sense of elitism permeates the Unity and is most strongly expressed through the high value its members place on psionic ability. The earliest known records of the Advent can be traced back to slightly after the formation of the Trade Order. At its inception, the Order sent emissaries to invite all known inhabited planets to join the organisation. One such group discovered a single desert world orbiting a massive red star. Surprisingly, the world was found to be populated by a thriving civilization. Excited by the potential for profit in this new market, the Order authorised immediate integration, and the emissaries initiated contact. However, the leaders of Unity decided to reject the membership offer. Not willing to accept failure, the Order sent a series of market research teams to acquire data that could be used to formulate a more elaborate strategy. They received a single, incomplete report containing disturbing information. The people of this desert world practiced what was considered sinful and taboo to the early Trade Order: cerebral integration technologies, unrestricted biological experimentation, strange forms of collectivism, and the wholesale usage of countless neurochemicals were but a few of the transgressions committed by the Advent against the Trade Order's bylaws. Thus, the trade worlds voted overwhelmingly that such an aberration had no place within the territories of their new order, and with an instinctive fear, the traders took control of the planet by force and exiled the inhabitants far into uncharted space. When the Trade Order forced the ancestors of the Advent from its homeworld, it made an indelible scar across the population's psyche. An etching was created upon Advent citizens in all the following centuries to extract retribution upon their enemy and assume their rightful place in the galaxy. This powerful drive for revenge pushed the Advent even further in its practices, advancing its technology level far beyond anything the traders could have imagined. The current Advent technology is so sophisticated that it rivals even the Vasari. Over the next 1,000 years, the Advent would use all of the resources at its disposal to create frightening new weapons and abilities powered by its extremely advanced Sci-Tech. However, it would appear that Unity has exhausted its resources, but with an arsenal to wield, they have determined that it is time to return their people to their original homeworld and fulfill their prophecies of dominion. The long war with the old Trade Order reorganised into the TEC and the newly introduced Vasari had soon drawn to a stalemate, and the Advent began to turn on one another. The Loyalists seek only to continue their quest for dominance over lesser species, and to extract vengeance upon those who banished them and left them for ruin. The Rebels, however, sense a corruption within them, driving the Advent's mad hunger for retribution. The Rebels seek to cleanse Unity of such a deviation from its teachings, and have the hope to establish diplomatic, if not peaceful, relations with the TEC and Vasari. And finally, the Vasari. Vasari technology is far more advanced than the industrious TEC, and is only rivaled by the Sci-Tech of the Advent. The Vasari specialise in genetic manipulation, nanotechnology, and phase space technology. Nanotechnology plays a huge role in Vasari society. It is used in the daily life of almost every citizen under Vasari rule. It has versatile uses, such as making spacecraft armour, or can even be used to improve the quality of products that are used in trading goods. Vasari nanites also have offensive purposes, such as jamming enemy spacecraft, repairing their own, or even being used in strikes against enemy orbital structures. Vasari phase mastery is incomparable. They possess the strongest known sensors in the known universe, and are able to detect all enemy units across multiple star systems. The Vasari knowledge of phase space is so vast that they can even hide their ships and structures within it, should they deem it necessary. Their FTL communication systems are also very specialised, allowing them to field much larger fleets than both the Advent or the TEC. Vasari culture is unique compared to the other two races. Where both the TEC and Advent function on the progression of free will, many Vasari fleets make use of enforced labour to further the needs of their empire's growth. And it wasn't until very recently that many Vasari began working in cooperation with the other races and gave up on using slavery as a primary means of production. Another large portion of Vasari culture is in the use of eugenics to advance Vasari growth. This is done through a directed reproduction and artificial augmentation of their genome. Genetic adaptation is also used on humans to increase their survivability on different types of planets. Examples of this process include genetic changes to respiration, so that a toxic atmosphere can be survived without the need for an environmental suit, or to produce increased subdermal fat to increase body temperature on frigid worlds. And that covers the three main factions that you can play as in Sins of a Solar Empire. Thanks for watching, folks. If you want to pick up Sins of a Solar Empire 2 and support the channel, please click the link in the video description or the pinned comment. And if you want to hear more from me, please click the video on screen now.